In this video, we're going to look at some basic animation tools and keyframing within Maya. So in order to set keyframes on our timeline, we need to understand how Maya's timeline is set up. By default, Maya is set up to animate at 24 frames equals 1 second. And currently in my timeline, I have 120 frames. If I go up to display, I can go to UI elements and down to range slider. This will show me the current time that I have within the bar down here. If I click and drag, I can see I have 1 to 120 frames showing. We notice that towards the end of the bar we have some blank space. This means that there is actually more frames that Maya is not showing because I've typed in down here 200 frames. So if I want to see all the frames, I can just click and drag this range slider out to view all of the frames. I can also type in frames here. So if I come in here and I type in 500, now I should have 500 frames, although you can see again Maya is not showing all 500 frames. We have to click and drag this out to get 500 frames. So we can change here, and we can also change right here to add 600. This will automatically add those frames in. However, we're still animating at only 24 frames equals 1 second of time. So keep that in mind. Also, if we right click on the timeline, we can see playback speed. Right now, the playback speed is set to real time. So you want to make sure when you're playing back your animations, you set it to real time so you get the actual view and not play every frame free or play every frame max real time. Okay, those are for allowing your computer to actually use up less memory when it's playing back the frames. So in order to start animating, we need to have an object. So I'm going to go to Create, Polyprimitives, and I will create a cube. Now I can see when I select this cube with my selection tool, I can look in the channel box and see we have position or translate XYZ, rotate XYZ, and scale XYZ. If I want to animate this object, the way you do this is first you would go to the frame you want, you would position your object where you want it to, so I can just position it up, and maybe we will scale it a little bit. And once you have that, then you set your key. And there are a couple ways to set your key. You can either click on the attribute which you set the value, and then right click and say key selected, and that will only key that particular attribute. Or you could click and drag to select all of them and do key selected. You could also do key all, keyable, which means it would key all of the keyable attributes here. Or you could do the shortcut, which is hit S on your keyboard. If you hit the letter S on your keyboard, it will automatically set the keyframe. So you can see when I hit S, all of these channels turn red, meaning that they are now animated, they have a keyframe. And in your timeline, you'll notice that there's a little red line indicating that on that frame, frame 1, is where you set that keyframe. Now a keyframe indicates a change. So we would move to another point in time by clicking and dragging or just clicking around. So I'll click on frame 100, and we would then position our object. So I'll move it up, and I'll hit E to rotate it around, and maybe R to scale it down. And then once again, we would either come in here, right click to key our attributes that we would want, or we would hit S on our keyboard to set a keyframe on all of those attributes there. So now I should have a keyframe on frame 100 and a keyframe on frame 1. So if I go to frame 1 and I drag in my timeline, I can see that Maya has interpolated between 1 and 100. If I hit play on the control panel here, I can see my animation actually occurring. So we can see again Maya has interpolated between 1 and 100. So if I go to, let's say, frame 40 and I say, okay, well I don't really like how that's working out here, maybe I would change it by first going to frame 40 and then maybe re-rotating it or rotating a different position and then scaling it again, and then once again we hit S to set the keyframe. So you can input keyframes wherever you would like to indicate a change on the timeline. If you're not happy with the speed, if it's moving too fast or too slow, what you could do is you can very easily come into the timeline, hold Shift, click and drag to select your keyframe, and then you can move that keyframe to a different position. And then you would right click and you can hit snap. So that way it snaps to that particular point. So that's frame 127. You can also click and drag to get multiple frames and move multiple at a time. And if you go to the outside of that selection, you will be scaling that time out rather than just positioning the time. So these are all easy ways in which to adjust your time. If you don't like a keyframe in a certain point, again, you can just click and drag to select that keyframe and then right click and hit delete. And now you've deleted that keyframe away. If you want to copy and paste a keyframe, you can just drag and then right click and say copy. Go to a different point in time, right click and say paste. And now you have kind of an animation loop created. Okay. So I'm going to click and drag all of these, right click and say delete to cut everything. So one thing that you may notice is that we're currently animating from the center of this cube. It's rotating from the center, scaling from the center, and positioning from the center. If you want to change that, you would hit insert. So that way you could move the pivot point to a different location and then hit insert again. Now, this cannot be animated in terms of animating the pivot point to different locations. The way in which you could change different locations is by setting up grouping. That is a quick and basic setup for your keyframes. And you can keyframe multiple different things, not just position, scale, and rotates. You can also key the color of your object, and you can also set up grouping in order to have one object control another object. So we'll look at that in the next video.